Amina Adeyemi was no stranger to pain. Born to a nomadic tribe in northern Nigeria, her childhood was an amalgam of fleeting joys and enduring hardships. After losing her parents to a bandit attack, she found herself in a bustling foster home in Lagos, far removed from the rolling dunes and open skies of her homeland. Her foster parents, while kind, struggled to provide for their 7 foster children, leaving Amina feeling like a shadow in a sea of chaos. Her tribal markings, delicate lines etched into her cheeks at birth, stood out in Lagos like an ancient relic amidst the neon-lit chaos of the city. People stared, whispered, and occasionally pointed, but Amina had learned to look past their gazes. With each passing year, her skin grew thicker, yet her heart yearned for acceptance and belonging. When she received a scholarship to St. Gabriel's Academy, one of Nigeria's most prestigious schools, she dared to hope. Maybe this was her chance to rewrite her story. The towering gates of St. Gabriel's Academy loomed before Amina like the entrance to another world. Unlike the overcrowded public schools she'd attended, this place screamed wealth and privilege. Students arrived in sleek cars, their uniforms crisp and perfectly tailored. Amina clutched her second-hand bag tightly, her neatly ironed but slightly oversized uniform a glaring contrast to her peers. Inside the gates, the air buzzed with chatter and laughter. Amina's eyes darted nervously, taking in the manicured lawns, gleaming buildings, and groups of students gathered in cliques. When she stepped into her classroom, the chatter hushed. All eyes turned to her. "Who's the new girl?" a boy with a polished accent asked, his tone dripping with curiosity. "Looks like a village girl," a girl whispered, loud enough for Amina to hear. Her cheeks burned, but she kept her head high. She found a seat at the back and avoided the stares that lingered like shadows. That evening, as she unpacked in the modest dormitory reserved for scholarship students, she resolved to prove them wrong. She would excel, not for their approval but for herself. The first day at St. Gabriel's Academy was overwhelming for Amina. The schedule was rigorous, with back-to-back classes and little room for idle chatter. She quickly realized the academic environment was nothing like what she'd experienced before. Teachers spoke with authority, their lessons filled with complex ideas that demanded her complete focus. Her classmates, however, were another story. They ignored her entirely or stared at her with disdain. During lunch, she carried her tray to a secluded corner of the cafeteria, hoping to avoid the prying eyes and whispered comments. She heard fragments of conversation as she passed. Is she really from a scholarship program? She looks so different. What tribe is she even from? Amina clenched her jaw but refused to let their words affect her. She sat alone, trying to enjoy her meal while blocking out the noise. It wasn't until a boy with a kind smile approached her that the tension lifted slightly. "Hey, you're new, right?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from her without waiting for an invitation. "I'm Kofi. Welcome to St. Gabriel's." She hesitated, unsure if he was genuinely kind or just curious like the others. "Amina," she said quietly. Kofi grinned. "Don't mind the others. They act like they own the place because they've been here forever. You'll get used to it." Something about his easygoing nature put her at ease. For the first time that day, Amina felt a glimmer of hope. Over the following weeks, Kofi made a point of speaking to Amina whenever he saw her. Though she was initially cautious, she began to look forward to his company. Kofi was everything her classmates weren't: approachable, funny, and genuinely interested in getting to know her. One afternoon, they sat under a large tree on the school grounds. Kofi shared stories about his family and his dreams of becoming an entrepreneur. When it was Amina's turn, she hesitated but finally opened up about her upbringing and the challenges she faced as a foster child. "I've always felt like I don't belong anywhere," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Kofi nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe you haven't found the right place yet. Or maybe you're the one who'll create it." His words stayed with her, lighting a spark she hadn't felt in years. As Amina settled into life at St. Gabriel's, she began noticing strange things about the school. Teachers often left meetings looking stressed, and students from the wealthiest families seemed to receive special treatment. Kofi, who had been at the school for years, confirmed her suspicions. "There's a lot of stuff that doesn't add up here," he said one day. "But no one talks about it. Most people are too scared. Amina's curiosity grew. What was happening behind the polished facade of St. Gabriel's Academy? She decided to keep her eyes open and take note of anything unusual. One evening, while walking past the administrative block, Amina overheard a heated argument between two teachers. She couldn't make out the details, but phrases like mismanagement of funds and bribery caught her attention. Her heart raced as she ducked into the shadows, straining to hear more. Before she could gather more information, the teachers stormed off in opposite directions. Amina returned to her dormitory, her mind racing. She needed to talk to Kofi about what she'd heard. When Amina told Kofi about the argument, he seemed intrigued but cautious. If there's something going on, it's risky to get involved, he warned. But what if it's affecting the scholarships? Amina argued. What if other students like me are losing their opportunities because of this? Kofi sighed but nodded. But if we're doing this, we have to be smart. No one can know we're looking into it. They shook hands, sealing their pact to uncover the truth. Over the next few weeks, Amina and Kofi began their investigation. They spent hours in the library, poring over school records and financial reports. Kofi, who had a knack for technology, managed to hack into a staff email account, revealing a series of suspicious transactions. Amina couldn't believe the scale of what they were uncovering. It wasn't just favoritism or minor corruption. It was a full-blown scandal that involved some of the school's top officials. Their activities didn't go unnoticed. One day, Amina found a threatening note in her locker. Stay out of things that don't concern you. She showed it to Kofi, her hands trembling. What if they know what we're doing? Kofi's expression darkened. We'll be careful. But this just proves we're on the right track. Despite the threats, Amina refused to back down. For the first time in her life, she felt a sense of purpose. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every student who had been silenced or overlooked. This isn't just about me, she told Kofi. It's about justice. He nodded, his admiration for her growing. Together, they vowed to expose the truth, no matter the cost. Amina and Kofi's investigation deepened, but the risks grew with each passing day. They decided to map out everyone connected to the suspicious transactions and discovered that some of the wealthiest students' families were heavily involved. These families had been donating large sums to the school, and in return, their children received unearned academic accolades and preferential treatment. What happens if we go too far? Amina asked one evening as they worked in the library. We're already in too far, Kofi replied. But if we don't stop this, who will? They agreed to be more cautious, but the pressure was mounting. Amina began to notice students whispering and glancing at her in the hallways. She wondered if someone had tipped off the administration. The headmistress, Mrs. Fajobi, seemed unusually attentive to Amina's movements. During assemblies, her sharp gaze seemed to linger on Amina longer than necessary. Even Kofi noticed. I think she knows something, he whispered after one particularly tense encounter. She can't know everything, Amina replied, trying to sound confident. But in truth, her nerves were fraying. A breakthrough came when they unintentionally found an ally in Grace, a fellow scholarship student. Grace had overheard part of their conversation and confronted them. You're digging into the school, aren't you? She asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and concern. At first, they denied it, but Grace's persistence won them over. She revealed that she'd been forced to falsify records under threat of losing her scholarship. They're doing more than you think, Grace said. And they won't stop unless someone exposes them. Reluctantly, Amina and Kofi brought Grace into their circle. Grace's information filled in critical gaps in their investigation. She helped them locate hidden records in the school's archives, which confirmed that funds meant for scholarships had been redirected into private accounts. This is big, Kofi said, staring at the evidence. If this gets out, it could take down the whole administration. Amina nodded, but the weight of what they were doing felt heavier than ever. Late one night, the trio sneaked into the school's administrative building to retrieve more evidence. Kofi had managed to disable the security cameras, but the tension was palpable as they navigated the dark hallways. In the headmistress's office, they found a safe containing more incriminating documents. Just as they were about to leave, a faint noise startled them. They froze, listening. "Someone's coming," Amina whispered. They barely escaped through a side door, but the close call left them shaken. The next day, Amina was summoned to the headmistress's office. Mrs. Fajobi's demeanor was icy as she questioned Amina about her late-night activities. "I've been hearing rumors about you," Mrs. Fajobi said. "Be careful, Amina. You wouldn't want to jeopardize your future here." It was a veiled threat, but Amina refused to show fear. "I'm only focused on my studies," she replied, meeting the headmistress's gaze. The warning was clear, but Amina knew they couldn't stop now. News of Amina and Kofi's investigation began to spread, creating a divide among the students. Some admired their courage, while others saw them as troublemakers. "Why don't you just mind your own business?" One of the wealthier students sneered at Amina during lunch. "I am," she shot back. "My business is making sure this school is fair for everyone." Her resilience inspired some of the quieter students, and a small group began to rally around her. Kofi decided it was time to leak part of their findings anonymously. They uploaded a document showing discrepancies in the school's financial records to a public forum. The reaction was immediate. Parents and students began demanding answers, and local news outlets picked up the story. "This is just the beginning," Kofi said, though the anxiety in his voice betrayed his confidence. The administration responded swiftly, denying the allegations and threatening legal action against anyone spreading false information. Security on campus was tightened, and students were warned not to engage in unauthorized activities. Amina and Kofi knew they had stirred the hornet's nest, but they remained determined. Stronger coalition to push their investigation forward. Kofi used his charm to approach influential students, while Grace quietly reached out to other scholarship recipients who had been mistreated by the administration. Amina's role was the most delicate. She was the face of the rebellion among the marginalized. Her tribal markings and humble background had once made her an outcast, but now they symbolized courage and defiance. "We're fighting for all of us," she told a small gathering of supporters late one evening. Despite the growing support, not everyone was on their side. Some students, loyal to their privileged families, accused the trio of fabricating evidence to tarnish the school's reputation. Others, still fearful of the administration's power, chose to remain silent. Their next step was crucial. They planned a secret meeting in an unused storeroom to strategize their next moves. The turnout was surprising. Almost 20 students came, many bringing stories of how the school's corruption had impacted them or their families. "People like us don't usually win," a boy named Emeka said, his voice trembling. "But maybe we can this time." Grace nodded firmly. "We don't need to win everything. We just need to make sure they can't keep doing this." The meeting ended with a renewed sense of purpose, but Amina couldn't ignore the risks. If they failed, the consequences would be devastating, not just for her, but for everyone who had placed their trust in her. Kofi used his technical skills to gain access to a restricted database containing records of large donations. The files showed a disturbing pattern. Families who donated over a certain amount of money consistently had their children's grades inflated and their extracurricular achievements fabricated. "This isn't just favoritism," Kofi said as he showed the documents to Amina and Grace. "This is fraud on a massive scale." They decided to compile their findings into a comprehensive report. Grace, meticulous as ever, worked on cross-referencing the data to ensure its accuracy. Meanwhile, Amina began drafting a letter to send anonymously to a prominent journalist known for exposing corruption. But the administration wasn't idle. Rumors spread that Mrs. Fajobi had hired private investigators to root out the whistleblowers. Security personnel roamed the campus more frequently, and random locker inspections became a common occurrence. Amina and Kofi realized they needed to move faster. "If they catch us, we're done," Amina said one evening as they worked on the report in her dorm room. "Then we make sure they don't catch us," Kofi replied, though the tension in his voice was unmistakable. The pressure began to take its toll on the trio. Grace, who had always been cautious, started questioning their approach. "What if we're wrong?" she asked during one of their late-night meetings. "What if we're missing something and this all blows up in our faces?" "We're not wrong," Amina said firmly. "We've seen the evidence. We've heard the stories. How can you doubt this now?" Grace sighed, avoiding Amina's gaze. "I'm just scared. If this fails, I'll lose my scholarship. My family is counting on me. Kofi placed a reassuring hand on Grace's shoulder. We're all scared, Grace. But if we don't do this, nothing will change. They'll keep getting away with it. The tension eased slightly, but Amina couldn't shake the feeling that their unity was fragile. She knew they needed to stay strong, but the cracks in their alliance were becoming harder to ignore. Amina finally finished drafting the letter to the journalist, detailing the corruption they had uncovered. With Kofi's help, she included key pieces of evidence, just enough to grab attention without revealing too much. Late one night, they uploaded the letter and accompanying documents to a secure platform. Amina's hands trembled as she clicked send. There's no going back now, she said quietly. The next morning, news broke. The journalist published an article exposing the corruption at St. Gabriel's Academy, citing an anonymous source. The school was thrust into the national spotlight, and parents began demanding answers. But with the attention came new dangers. Mrs. Fajobi issued a statement denying the allegations and vowed to find the cowards who had tarnished the school's name. Amina's stomach churned as she watched the news coverage, knowing the storm was far from over. As the investigation gained traction, Amina received an unexpected visitor in her dormitory, her foster mother, Mrs. Adeyemi. The older woman looked tired but determined as she embraced Amina tightly. I saw the news, Mrs. Adeyemi said. Are you involved in this? Amina hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. I'm just doing what I think is right, she finally said. Mrs. Adeyemi sighed, her expression a mix of pride and worry. You've always been brave, Amina. But be careful. People in power don't like being challenged. Her foster mother's words stayed with her long after she left. Amina knew she was walking a dangerous path, but she also knew she couldn't turn back now. The article sparked a wave of support from former students who came forward with their own stories of injustice at St. Gabriel's. Social media buzzed with outrage, and a petition demanding the resignation of the school's administration gained thousands of signatures within days. Encouraged by the growing public outcry, Amina, Kofi, and Grace decided to release more evidence. This time, they included detailed records of the fraudulent transactions, making it impossible for the administration to deny the allegations. But the backlash was swift. Amina found herself targeted online, with anonymous accounts posting hateful comments and threatening messages. Stay strong, Kofi told her. They're just trying to scare you. Amina nodded, but the weight of the fight was beginning to wear on her. As the school administration reeled from the fallout of the revelations, they launched an aggressive retaliation campaign. Amina, Kofi, and Grace became targets for disciplinary actions disguised as routine checks. Amina's dorm was searched without warning, and one of her notebooks, thankfully empty of incriminating evidence, was confiscated. You think this is about justice? Mrs. Fajobi said coldly when Amina confronted her after the search. This is about loyalty. And you've betrayed this institution. The headmistress's words stung, but Amina refused to back down. Loyalty shouldn't come at the cost of integrity, she replied. Meanwhile, Kofi faced pressure from his family. His father summoned him home and demanded that he distance himself from the scandal. Do you know what this could do to our reputation? Mr. Badu thundered. It's not about reputation, Dad. It's about doing what's right, Kofi argued. But his father's disappointment was palpable, and for the first time, Kofi questioned whether he could continue. Grace, too, was struggling. An anonymous email threatened to expose her involvement unless she dropped out of the investigation. They're trying to break us, she told Amina during a late-night call. We can't let them, Amina replied firmly. If we give up now, they'll win. The trio decided to lay low for a while, focusing on securing the remaining evidence they needed to solidify their case. They knew the administration was watching their every move, but they were determined to stay one step ahead. The constant stress began to take its toll on Amina. She found it increasingly difficult to concentrate in class, and her grades started slipping. The whispers and stares from her classmates felt louder than ever, and even her closest supporters seemed hesitant to associate with her in public. One afternoon, after yet another confrontation with a group of hostile students, Amina broke down in tears in the privacy of her dorm room. Kofi and Grace found her there, huddled in a corner, her body shaking with sobs. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," she admitted, her voice barely audible. Kofi knelt beside her, his expression soft but determined. "You're the strongest person I know, Amina. If anyone can get through this, it's you." Grace nodded, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We're in this together. You're not alone." Their words gave Amina the strength she needed to carry on. She wiped her tears and took a deep breath. "But let's finish this." The trio devised a bold plan to gather irrefutable evidence. Kofi managed to borrow a hidden recording device from a friend who was studying journalism. Their target, Mrs. Fajobi herself. They learned that the headmistress would be meeting with a group of influential parents to discuss damage control strategies. Kofi volunteered to plant the device in the meeting room, a task that required him to sneak past the heightened security. The plan went off without a hitch, and the recording captured everything. Mrs. Fajobi admitting to falsifying records, manipulating donations, and threatening staff and students to maintain control. When the trio listened to the recording later that night, they knew they had struck gold. "This is it," Grace said, her voice filled with awe. "This is what we've been waiting for." With the recording in hand, the trio decided to take their fight to the next level. They arranged a press conference, enlisting the help of the journalist who had published their earlier findings. The event was held at a local community center, far from the school's prying eyes. Amina, nervous but resolute, took the stage alongside Kofi and Grace. "We're here today because we believe in truth and justice," she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "What's happening at St. Gabriel's Academy is wrong, and it needs to stop." The recording was played for the gathered journalists and community members, eliciting gasps of shock and murmurs of outrage. By the time the press conference ended, the story had gone viral. Back at the school, chaos erupted. Parents flooded the administration with calls, demanding an explanation. The local education board announced an immediate investigation, and Mrs. Fajobi went into hiding. The next day, the school was unrecognizable. Security guards patrolled the grounds, and students were called out of class for questioning by investigators. Amina noticed Mrs. Fajobi's office door was conspicuously closed, and rumors swirled that she had been suspended. For the first time in weeks, Amina felt a glimmer of hope. "We did it," she whispered to Kofi during lunch. "Not yet," he replied. "But we're getting closer." The fallout from the press conference was swift and far-reaching. St. Gabriel's Academy became the center of national attention, with reporters camping outside the school gates and cameras capturing every moment of the chaos. Students were divided, some rallied behind Amina, Kofi, and Grace, while others accused them of ruining the school's reputation. In the midst of the storm, Amina received a call from the journalist who had published their story. "Your bravery is inspiring," he said. "But be careful, people in power won't give up without a fight." His warning proved prophetic. A prominent parent, whose child was heavily implicated in the scandal, launched a smear campaign against the trio. Fake stories circulated online, accusing them of fabricating evidence for personal gain. Amina's heart sank as she read the cruel comments on social media, but Kofi refused to let her despair. "The truth is on our side," he reminded her. "And people are starting to see that." Their supporters, including former students and teachers, began organizing protests outside the school, demanding justice and accountability. Placards reading "Stop Corruption and Justice for All Students" lined the streets, and the noise grew too loud for the administration to ignore. By the end of the week, the Education Board announced a full audit of the school's finances and operations. It was a victory, but Amina knew the fight was far from over. Although suspended from her position, Mrs. Fajobi was far from defeated. She hired a powerful legal team to discredit the allegations and issued a statement denying all wrongdoing. "These are baseless accusations from disgruntled individuals," her lawyer declared on national television. The trio met in Kofi's room to discuss their next move. "She's trying to shift the narrative," Grace said, her frustration evident. "We need to stay ahead of her," Kofi replied. "The more evidence we uncover, the harder it'll be for her to deny the truth." The pressure intensified when Amina received a threatening email warning her to drop the investigation or face serious consequences. She showed it to Kofi and Grace, her hands trembling. "We can't let them scare us," Kofi said firmly. "We're doing this for everyone who's been silenced." But as the threats grew more personal, Amina couldn't help but wonder if they were pushing too far. A surprising ally emerged in the form of an alumnus named Tund, who had graduated from St. Gabriel's a decade earlier. Tund, now a successful lawyer, contacted the trio after reading about their story online. "I've seen this kind of corruption before," he said during their first meeting. "And I want to help." Tund provided legal advice, helping them protect their identities while strengthening their case against Mrs. Fajobi and the implicated families. He also connected them with other alumni who shared stories of similar injustices they had experienced at the school. The support bolstered their confidence, but it also attracted more scrutiny. Mrs. Fajobi's legal team began questioning Tund's credibility, attempting to frame him as a disgruntled former student with an agenda. "She's scared," Tund said with a wry smile when the trio expressed concern. "And that means we're winning." The Education Board's audit uncovered undeniable evidence of corruption, including financial irregularities, forged academic records, and coercion of staff. Faced with mounting pressure, Mrs. Fajobi resigned, claiming she was stepping down for the sake of the school. The news sent shockwaves through the school community. Students cheered, parents demanded more accountability, and Amina felt a surge of relief. "We did it," she told Kofi and Grace. "She's gone." But Tund warned them not to celebrate too soon. "This is just the beginning," he said. "There are still people in power who'll try to bury this." With Mrs. Fajobi's resignation making headlines, Amina, Kofi, and Grace found themselves thrust into the public eye. Reporters clamored for interviews, and social media buzzed with debates about their actions. See you in the second part of this true life story. Please leave a comment in the comment section below. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring and true life story like this.